Solete sodales. So normally, I'm only going to make these videos on Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays and Fridays. But I'm making this one on Saturday, and there may be a few other Saturday videos too. Because sometimes there's just stuff that you need to think about or talk about or process over the weekend. And one of those things I realized as we talk about virtual assessment is what's so scary about this? Why is it so scary? Some people's first reaction may be, I'm not scared, I'm just frustrated. But we know that frustration is always kind of a secondary emotion. And some people may say, I'm not scared, I'm just furious. But anger is often a secondary emotion too. So if you look at yourself and you think, yeah, maybe this is kind of scary, or if you already know that it is kind of scary, this video is for you. So, how does this picture make you feel? Depending on your life experience with camping and tents and snow and mountains and early mornings, you may think, oh, that is the most wonderful thing I've ever seen, or you may think that is just completely terrifying. There's a bear. I know there's a bear. I love that picture, but that's because I haven't gotten up close and personal with bears and my camping experiences. If I had, I might have a very different feeling, although I don't think bears are going to live in that landscape. Well, what about this picture? Depending on your experiences with frozen lakes, partly frozen lakes, ice that looks like it might bear your weight, but maybe it won't, you may think, oh, that is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, or oh, stay away, stay away. Because our experiences, good things that have happened to us and scary things that have happened to us, all of those things affect how we respond in any given situation. And sometimes we can predict it if it's a situation like one we've experienced before, but sometimes we can't. And the situations that we all face in this strange world of remote and hybrid teaching and learning, this is new. This is new territory. So we don't necessarily know how we're going to feel. So here's some good news. There are only 5 basic fears, out of which almost all of our other so-called fears are manufactured, says Carl Albrecht in this great article in Psychology Today that I found when I was looking for a list of the core human fears. You might be afraid, depending on your experience with mountain lakes and things that are in mountain lakes and how good a swimmer you are. You might be afraid of this picture. You might think, oh, or you might think, where is a canoe? Depending on your experiences with canoes, you might be thinking, no canoe. So the good news is that 2 of these 5 fears, these 5 basic fears that Dr. Albrecht identified, do not apply when we are changing our assessment practices. They do not apply in our remote and hybrid teaching context directly, because no matter what we do or don't do with assessment, no one's going to die and no one's going to get physically hurt. And the 2 most basic fears are fear of dying and fear of physical harm, what he calls annihilation and mutilation. Now, obviously, there's scary things out there in the world that we could die from or we could end up with physical damage. But in terms of our assessment practices in our virtual or hybrid context, they will not cause death, nor will they cause physical harm, right? So we don't have to worry about those. But then there are the other 3. And the other 3 really are very real considerations as we are thinking about changing our assessment practices. And the other big 3 are called fear of loss of autonomy or failure, the fear that someone is going to have to control you because they don't think you can control yourself, Fear of separation, abandonment, and rejection. Fear that you're going to do something that's so different from what all the other people do, that they will reject you and you'll be all alone. And the biggest of all, fear of ego death, humiliation, shame, feeling as though you want to crawl under a rock and pull the rock in after you. We've all had situations in our lives, I know I have, where one, two, or all three of those were operating. And if you've ever been in one of those situations, you know how paralyzing, how just overwhelming those fears can be. And you can see how changing something as fundamental and basic as what we do as teachers is how we assess our students. That could be scary on all three of those levels. What if they think we're doing a bad job? What if we do a bad job? What if they reject what we did and who we are? What if we're completely humiliated and shamed? I mean, those are real fears, right? And sometimes those fears can keep us stuck, even when we don't want to be stuck, because those fears are powerful. Now, there's some good news. There's some really good news, and it comes from an unlikely place. A process developed by Dr. Otto Scharmer and his colleagues at MIT and at the Presencing Institute, which is the organization that they set up to kind of spread this. We'll use a modified version of what Dr. Scharmer does in a number of things that are coming up. But I wanted to show you how it works. He calls it the U process, and we're going to take a look at part of it today. Normally, in normal times, we don't really have to think about what we're doing, right? I mean, and why we're doing it. And we really don't have to think that much about how we're doing it, because normally, in normal times, we can do a process that he calls downloading, where you take your old experiences, you choose the one that fits, and you apply that to the current situation. And it works really well in ordinary times, in the kinds of times that are simple or obvious, or even the ones that are complicated, and the Knuffen model that we've looked at earlier this week. It also seems really safe because you get to avoid all three of those core fears, right? But unfortunately, downloading doesn't work when the situation is different. We can't just download our old assessment practices into our new reality because, gosh, if I gave a vocabulary quiz the way that I gave one in 2007, calling out the word, having the student write down the word and the meaning, I think all of my students would, sitting in their homes, would probably get pretty good grades. But would I know anything about the words that they actually knew? Would they feel good about the quote A that they got by looking up the word? Would it accomplish any purpose? No. So we got to change, right? But as soon as we start to change, things get harder. The first thing that we have to do, says Dr. Scharmer, is we have to suspend that old narrative and open our minds to new possibilities and bring in our curiosity. But unfortunately, as soon as we bring in our curiosity, we also bring in that fear of failure, a thing that he calls the voice of judgment, our internalized fear of loss of autonomy, right? And then, if we get past that, we can redirect our attention and open our hearts to new forms of understanding, says Dr. Scharmer, and bring in our compassion. And that's when we start to begin to feel as well as see different solutions. But then that brings in a thing that he calls the voice of cynicism. What if I'm wrong? Now we've not only got that first fear, but we've got the second one too, right? We've got rejection as well as loss of autonomy. And if we get past that gateway, then comes what Dr. Scharmer calls letting go. Opening your will to try new things. Bringing in the courage that you actually have inside you all along. But to get there, we have to get past this third voice that he calls the voice of fear. And I think we all know that voice. What if they hate me? What if they reject me? What if I'm totally alone? That's the ego death fear from before. Now, the good news is that you can get past those fears. The good news from the Psychology Today article, he says, stop thinking of fears as being, some dark force within you. Fear is information. And once you realize, oh, fear is information, these voices that seem so frightening and powerful are helpful information guides. And once you can change your perspective, then you can get past those things. You can open your will to try new things, but how do you pick the right thing or a right thing or a thing to try? Well, we'll talk about those things next week. We'll talk about those things in the next series of videos starting on Monday. But in the meantime, here's some even better news. You don't have to try this alone. And if you're thinking, I don't know how to not do it alone, the good news is you've got this wonderful community of people here on this Facebook group. If you need me, I want you to get in touch with me. The contact information is in the comment below. And you get in touch and we'll talk and we'll work through the process and we'll find you a solution. And so one of these pictures is probably speaking to your soul. One of them is saying, I want to be in this place. And it's a different picture for different people. Maybe some people need a picture that isn't even on this slide. But once you get past those three scary voices that are really just informational voices, warning, be careful. Think this through. Once you get past them and you find the right thing, everything's going to be so much better, and it doesn't have to be difficult and complicated and hard anymore. So we'll talk more about the process next week, but I wanted to make sure to get this to you guys today because it's just so important. So until we see each other the next time, Walete Sodales, have a great day, have a great weekend, and we will see each other really soon.